Across workplaces worldwide, digital collaboration tools have reshaped how teams connect, and now some major players are rethinking that balance between remote and in-office work. Joining me now is Darren Woolley. Darren, it's good to see you. How significant is the change that we're seeing for everyday workers? Obviously, Microsoft bringing that news to the table.
Yeah, Mike, it's an interesting challenge, because we're in a highly competitive employment market. And so employers are trying to balance giving people the freedom to be able to work from home in their own way, but also wanting to make sure that they're maximising productivity, because there are some big productivity issues facing business today. So the news that particularly Microsoft Teams has the ability to track what people are doing in their own homes, I think is not just a concern for Microsoft employees, but all employees, because it goes to the very question of trust between employers and their employees, and could potentially have a big impact on the way Microsoft is perceived by the public generally.
Yeah, and of course Microsoft is based in most homes, let's face it. Do you reckon this move could damage Microsoft's brand reputation in any way, shape or form?
Absolutely. We don't want to be constantly watched. This idea that Big Brother's watching you and keeping a track on you is already a concern, because social media is using cookies and things to actually see what you're doing online. But then to actually have an application that can tell whether you're even in the room and interacting with it is a real concern. And I think, employers have to try and get the balance right. They need to get permission, at least from their employees, to have this type of monitoring going on. And if they don't trust their employees, a big question has to be, well, what are they doing to build trust?
Yeah, good call. Do you think other tech companies might follow now that Microsoft is perhaps leading by example?
Well, if they do, they're going to have to be very careful in the way they do that. I think it's probably not so much the tech companies, but the ways that they're being implemented by the actual employers. If an employer is monitoring their employees that closely, perhaps they should stop pretending to offer work from home and just get people into the office where you can have as many cameras as you like watching everyone.
I think that's a very good point you make there. Stop pretending, stop putting it in the fine print, stop trying to hide it if that is your intention. What do you think this signals about long-term future of hybrid work and applications such as Teams? I mean, people are putting these little Google Home mini pods and all sorts of things that listen to you at home as well, let alone webcams and things like that. It feels like we are in the age of Big Brother.
Well, and I think anyone that thinks that they have privacy these days is probably deluding themselves. There are so many ways we're being monitored. Everything we think, buy, say and do has the potential to end up on a database somewhere. And I think that's the other concern. Obviously using these types of applications, employers are collecting so much information about their employees. They're going to have to be really careful how they store and use that. We've seen some massive leaks of data out of organisations, and the impact that could have if you're leaking that information about your employees could be unbelievable.
Yeah, the implications on employers as well as equally as sort of difficult when it comes to cybersecurity and stuff like that. But let's jump over to our next topic for the moment. And as artificial intelligence systems rely on vast amounts of creative data, governments are now facing tough choices about copyright control. Take us through a bit about this one, Darren. Australia's latest decision. It's got implications.
Absolutely. Look, and this is an issue that governments everywhere have actually been struggling with, and we've seen some of them land on the side of the tech companies to allow exceptions where they can use this information. But it goes to the very centre of what it means to create something. Anyone in the media, anyone in music, anyone that's an author or a publisher has a absolute business model based on being able to own the copyright on their creations and be able to then have the right to commercialise that any way they like. To then have open slather and allow a third party to come in and just consume, let's say steal all of that copyright information that has intrinsic commercial value at no cost, has to be questioned. And while I understand the side of the tech companies saying that this will hold back development of AI in Australia and that the AI companies will go to other markets where they don't take such a hard line that the Australian government has, I think what we've got to see here is some sort of balance and a recognition of the value that's actually intrinsic in that copyright material.
Yeah, I agree with you. And as somebody who has created in the past and done this, it has been an interesting ride to see what's coming out. What's at the heart of this copyright dispute, though, when it comes to those governmental regulations and that red tape, if you will?
Well, look, all the government's doing is standing by the same Copyright Act of 1969, which actually protects the creator and gives them ownership of the materials that they create. And that doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a musician, an author, a photographer, an artist, whoever is creating something. From the moment that that idea, thought, or inspiration's recorded, they have a way of protecting themselves. Now, the system's not ideal because to take that to court is not going to be necessarily the way to solve it.
Do creators stand to gain from this or lose from these tighter restrictions, do you think? The more sort of, again, red tape, as I mentioned, you wrap around something, it can be more difficult to actually create something with that human intrinsic value that we're maybe lusting after.
Yeah, look, I think the creators, while the copyright stays as it is, they're going to be protected and not lose their rights. But if it does change, will they actually gain? It would have to be on the basis that they get at least some sort of acknowledgement and recognition for their creation. They're losing potential commercial value, so either they need to be compensated or at the very minimum acknowledged for their creation in the first place. And I think there's a number of ways of solving this. The government of Australia has taken probably the most conservative approach and just said we're sticking with the copyright laws as they stand, and there will be no exception for big tech companies to use this for their AIs.
I'm wondering what other countries might learn from Australia's stance. We've done it with social media and under 16s at the moment, and all eyes were on that decision for a long time. I'm wondering if it'll be a similar approach. What do you think?
I think the Australian government for many years has been a real world leader in social change, whether it's our treatment of tobacco marketing or now, with social media implications, the media bargaining code that they put in place. All of these things have been real leadership positions, and I think the world looks to us to see how it rolls out. And look, as an Australian, you have to be happy with the fact that we have a government culture that actually looks at being at the leading edge of dealing with these issues.
Yeah, I think it's certainly an interesting looking at us as an example is quite a compliment in many ways, but we'll have to wait and see how it all unfolds and whether or not creators actually do get that credit that they are after. And Darren, I want to thank you for joining us on the program. Leave us with a piece of advice moving forward. What do you think the future will hold in this space?
Well, look, I think that at some point the AI will need to have materials. We just have to get to the negotiating table to work out how that's going to be compensated.
Well said, and look forward to speaking again soon. Cheers.
Thanks very much.